Hi everyone. Today we are beginning Chapter 6, which is the one and only chapter that is part of Unit 4 of the American Politics and Government AP course curriculum, which is focused on American political beliefs and behaviors. This chapter is going to look at political ideology, what informs our political preferences, how we measure what individuals and the American public believe about various issues, and then how that translates into political action, so political participation, who participates in government and why, and what types of indicators can we see in terms of demographics that might point to what somebody is likely to believe politically, or how likely they might be to participate in our political system. So today's video lecture is specifically going to focus on political culture and American values and start to look at political socialization, so how we learn our political beliefs. So as always, you can take notes in your packet as you watch, and if you have questions, be sure to ask them and get any clarifications that you need in class. So to begin with, looking at political culture and American values. In general, a political culture is referring to how citizens think about their political system and their role in it. Political culture is defined then by the widely shared beliefs, values, and norms that define the relationship between citizens to the government and between citizens with each other. In the United States, our American political culture is called the American Creed, and we are the only country founded on a creed, and it is called that because despite our differences in political opinions, our American political culture is characterized by core shared political values. In the U.S., we have what would be called a consensual political culture because of these broad shared values. So we have these shared core tenets, beliefs, but there's oftentimes disagreement over how values should be interpreted, prioritized, and implemented. There's agreement over what they are, but disagreement over how we should interpret them and see those beliefs implemented in this country. And the fact that we have a consensual political culture is actually fairly impressive because of our immense diversity. Countries with conflictual political cultures have different groups that clash with their opposing beliefs. Here we see the 5 major values or tenets that our political culture is based on, the American Creed. So differences in political attitudes in the U.S. center on the American Creed. So what we believe about these values, how we want to see them implemented, is what influences ideology and attitudes about government and politics. And beliefs Americans have across the political spectrum vary really on interpretations of these 5 values: populism, liberty, equality or egalitarianism, individualism, and capitalism or laissez-faire economics. So the importance that we place on these, how we define or interpret these values, will change. So the first one, liberty, this is perhaps the most important. This is the idea that rights are inherent. We should let people do as they please. All men are created equal and have certain rights like life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Equality or egalitarianism, one of the major discussions here, different interpretations of this value would be whether or not we're talking about equality of opportunity or equality of outcome, equal treatment before the law. We see different interpretations of this idea of equality, and that can lead to tensions and differences in approaches to policymaking. Individualism refers to the idea that we place importance and emphasis on the individual, and this belief that we should allow individuals to succeed on their own as much as possible and get ahead on their own. And this kind of goes back to the idea of equality, that we want equal opportunities to succeed. We want the individuals to make that happen, not necessarily equal outcomes. Then capitalism, laissez-faire economics, a belief in the free market, that you have the right to get rich, that the government should play a small role in the wealth or success you have in the economic sphere. And then finally, we have populism. And this goes back to the idea of the people being at the heart of government. Government is based on consent of the governed, and the legitimacy of our government lies in the hands of the people. Additionally, rule of law and limited government are other important ideas that we have. The idea with rule of law that no one is above the law, and with limited government that there are restrictions on what the government can do, and checks and balances help with this, that there are certain rights that cannot be taken away. So when it comes to the American Creed then, different interpretations of these core values affect the attitudes that we as citizens have towards our government and the role that it should play. And it can lead to a development of different political ideologies that fall across the political spectrum, and differing interpretations of these can lead to tensions in policy making. So we'll see how a citizen's political ideology is kind of shaped then by this intersection of their demographics, interpretation of political culture and beliefs, and social changes. So how do we learn political beliefs? How do we become political beings? This is all accomplished through a process known as political socialization, and this is where an individual requires their political orientation or opinion over time. And this process starts at a very young age and will continue throughout the lifetime, but we see that this really begins and is most pronounced in childhood and the young adult years. It's an ongoing process, different factors at play, but one's political orientation tends to grow stronger and more solid the older you get. The later in life, your political orientation tends not to change as much. As you get older, you're also more likely to participate in politics more often than younger people. Now, when it comes to political socialization, there are really three major sources that will have the most influence on one's political socialization and how they become that political being, where they have these ideas about politics that place them somewhere along the political spectrum. Family is the most important of those. Family will play a central role in one's political socialization, and parents are the strongest predictor of a child or a younger person's political preference. And this is because you spend more time with your family than anyone else. Your parents answer questions about current events and world events. There's more emotional investment in a family, and you spend more time with them than anyone else. Additionally, media is another important source of political socialization, and media's influence on political socialization is becoming stronger as social media is becoming more common, and you have technology, you have information at your fingertips. You can start to look up anything on your own. But mass media sources, so TV in addition to social media, are very important influences and factors as well. And how we consume media will affect our interpretation of events and therefore lead to our interpretations of political events and government actions. And then finally, school. Students, young people spend a lot of time in school as well, and so civics and U.S. history classes will help you become educated. We hope you leave with a positive view of our U.S. political system, and more educated citizens are more likely to vote. So we hope that leaving school, you see purpose in participation all through your life. Other sources of political socialization that we see would be religion, peer groups, so the other people you hang out with, and then your geographic region. So where in the country do you live? There are certain areas of the country that we would say are more liberal or more conservative, and even within states, those differences exist as well. There are also certain demographic trends that give someone a more political bend. So these types of factors, along with those socializing agents, your interpretation of the American Creed, all also will play into then where you fall along the political spectrum. So you can see here just some varying characteristics, demographic trends. So demographics would be things like age, race, gender, geographic location, income level. And there are certain trends that we can see would give a person a political bend to be more liberal or more conservative. Now, beliefs are not static. They change over time. And even though political socialization happens very early on, political beliefs and opinions can change. One of those reasons is the life cycle, the generational effect, which is this idea that people of the same generation have lived through some of the same life events that have impacted and shaped their views on politics and government. For instance, those who lived through the Great Depression were more frugal. People that lived through the Vietnam era and Watergate tended to have a declining trust in government. And we saw this with the life cycle effect too. So for instance, we can see a public trust in government steadily declined starting in the late 60s into the 70s. And that was kind of this perfect storm of events that had taken place that really shook Americans' trust in government and policymakers to do the right thing. We see the life cycle effect in terms of younger and older Americans. So younger Americans are usually less informed, less likely to participate in politics. But the older you get, the more informed, the more involved you are. And this could just be over different concerns in life, different priorities. When you're in college versus retiring, when you're older, you tend to have a higher level of political interest. And then globalization. This idea that America is more and more connected with other countries, other people, businesses. We are a wide and interconnected world now. And so policymakers have to consider actions and reactions of other countries. Many decisions no longer just affect America. So we are widely intertwined. And the U.S. has tried to spread values of democracy abroad and encourage what we call democratization. But we also have to be aware that other countries are trying to challenge that at the same time. Here is just a graph that kind of goes back to that idea of differences in the life cycle that you can see in terms of voter turnout. Older Americans are much more likely to participate than younger Americans. And one thing that I want you to consider is what the impact of that is then on politics. Policymakers are going to listen to those who are involved in participating. And if it's older Americans showing up at the polls, that's going to impact that. And so we can see that this is a trend that has been going on throughout time, that the 18 to 24-year-olds, the youngest voter demographic, always lower turnout than the 65-plussers. You'll also notice, though, that both age groups trend up and down, kind of that zigzag pattern. The high points would be presidential election years. The lower points are what we call off-year or midterm elections. And midterm election turnout always tends to be lower than presidential election years. And we'll talk about some reasons for that later on. But given that we are headed into a midterm this year, in 2022, that would be something to consider. Okay, this concludes our video lecture. If you have any questions on anything that we discussed today, please be sure to come and ask them at the start of class tomorrow.